All right, we are back. We are going to get started talking about example 3 in chapter 1, section 2. But in order to do that, first we have to talk about the distributive property. So you can use the distributive property to multiply numbers mentally by breaking apart one of the numbers and writing it as a sum or a difference. So we're going to be practicing this in example 3, and I'll tell you more about it in just a second. But first, let's talk about the distributive property. So what the distributive property says is if we take 6 multiplied by the quantity 9 plus 14, that is the same when the 6 is multiplied by outside of the parentheses, as going 6 times 9 plus 6 times 14. What it says in the distributive property is that those things are equivalent. Now let's take it down here and see if that's actually the case. 6 times 9 plus 6 times 14. All right, cool. So let's do this one, this side of the equation. Remember, equation separates the equal sign separates an equation into two sides. So let's do the order of operations, which says we have to do the parentheses first. So 9 plus 14 should be 23. So we have 6 times 23. And if we go ahead over here on the side, 6 times 3 is 18. 6 times 2 is 12. Carry the with the 1 would be 12 plus 1 is 13. Okay, so that equals 138. Now let's do the other side. Order of operations says we have to do the multiplication first. So 6 times 9 is 54 plus 6 times 14. I'm not sure I have to do that. I don't know that one off the top of my head. So 6 times 4 is 24. Write the 4, carry the 2. 6 times 1 is 6, plus 2 is 8. So that ends up being 84. And then if we add those two things, I'm going to go 84 plus 54 over here on the side. That's 4 plus 4 is 8. 8 plus 5 is 13. And boom, there we have it. 138 equals 138. 138 equals 138. So that's a true statement. That means it works. So that's how the distributive property can be used when you have addition within the parentheses. Let's go ahead and do the algebra part. So A multiplied the quantity B plus C. Remember A, B, C are just letters that represent numbers. Then what you do is you just distribute this A to both things. You go A times B plus A times the C. So A multiplied by the quantity, B plus C, is the same thing as AB, or A times B, plus AC, or A times C. All right, cool. Let's go over here. So let's see how this works with subtraction inside the parentheses. And it really works exactly the same. Whenever you have a number outside of the parentheses that is related to the parentheses by multiplication, you can use the distributive property, which just states, hey, you distribute that A 8 to the 5, so A times 5 minus 8 times 2. And those things are equivalent. They equal the same thing. So let's go down here just to make sure. We got 8 times 5 minus 2. And see, I didn't write the little dot there, but if I just write 8 right next to the parentheses, it means the same thing. So in mathematics, it's really, really important to know that 8 times the quantity 5 minus 2 is the same thing as just 8 times 5 minus 2, 8 written right by it without the dot. They mean the same thing. Okay, so that's a dot. That's 8 times 5 minus 8 times 2. So let's do order of operations on this side of the equation, which states we have to do the parentheses first, which would be 5 minus 2, which is 3. So we have 8 times 3 on this side, and 8 times 3 is just 24. And all of this stuff is supposed to be equal to what's on this side. Now, just ignore that little dot. I kind of messed up. We'll make it a part of the 5. We'll make it like a really, really bold 5. Okay, so order of operations says we need to do the multiplication before the subtraction. So 8 times 5 is 40 minus 8 times 2, which is 16. And if we go 40 minus 16, we have to borrow. Make that a 3. That's going to be 10 minus 6, which is 4. And then 3 minus 1 is 2. So 24, yes, it is the same thing. So it works with either addition in the parentheses or subtraction. You just distribute that 8 to both things. Distribute to the 5, distribute to the 2, and it ends up equaling. So let's go ahead and do it here algebraically. So we have A multiplied by the quantity B minus C. So we're going to distribute that A there to the B. So we have AB minus A times the C. So you just go ahead and distribute that A to both things. All right, let's go ahead and see a problem. Okay, example number 3. So there's really 2 ways to do this. So we are going to figure out what 6 times 54 is. Now, we know that we could go 54 times 6 and figure out the answer there. But what we're going to be doing is we're going to be using the distributive property to multiply mentally. Now, how you do that is that you break up this number 54. Well, what is 54 the same as? So the first thing is using, method 1 is using addition. So what I know about 54 is 54 is the same thing as 50 plus 4, right? 50 plus 4 is the same thing as 54. So you're just going 6 times 54, but I'm just writing the number 54 differently, but they really mean the same thing. So then what we're going to do is we're just going to use distributive property. So we're going to go 6 times the 50, and 6 times 50, there's a 0, so we can use my little 0 rule. What's 6 times 5? That's 30, add a 0. So 6 times 5 is 30. And then add that 0, and it actually ends up being 300. Plus, we're going to go 6 times 4, which ends up being, what does it end up being? 26 times 4 is 24. And then all that equals just 324. So that would be the answer doing method 1. So, you know, just a different way to use distributive property to kind of break this number up to get the answer. Now let's go over what method 2 is. So method 2 is actually using subtraction. So we can rewrite this number 54. So I'm going to rewrite this 6 times just like before, but we're going to rewrite this 54 using subtraction. And what I'm going to use is 60 minus, what is it? 60 minus 6. 60 minus 6 is the same thing as 54. So we're just rewriting it. Now we're going to use the distributive property here. So when I do the distributive property, I do 6 times 60, which is, I'm going to use my little 0 rule. 6 times 6 is 36 and add the 0, so it's 360. And then minus 6 times 6, which is 36. So now I'm just going to go off to the side and do this little subtraction problem. 360 minus 36. So I have to borrow from the 6, make that a 5. 10 minus 6 is 4. 5 minus 3 is 2, and 3. So that ends up being 324, which is exactly the same answer as we got before. So when you're doing this problem, what you want to think about is, okay, when you're doing the method of addition and subtraction, you know that 54 falls between 2 numbers, numbers like that are multiples of 10. So 54 falls between 50 and it falls between 60, right? So 50 is the one that you're going to use for addition, 50 plus 4. Subtraction, you're going to use the 60 minus 6, and that's how you get 54. So when you're doing the next problem, that's what you kind of want to look at. Now, lastly, if we went ahead and did just the straight multiplication, let's see if we get the same answer. 6 times 4 is 24, 2. 6 times 5 is 30 plus 2, which is 32. So you get the same thing, 324. Okay, perfect. Now this is your turn. So I want you to go ahead and pause. I want you to work this problem out, and then pause it, and then restart, press play, and we will talk about it in just a second. All right, I'm glad you're back. We are going to do both methods. So you have to do both methods for this when you use a distributive property to find 8 times 19. So method 1, remember, is with addition. And method 2 is with subtraction. So first, I'm going to talk about the number 19. What two tens is it between? Well, it's in between 10 and it's in between 20. So this is the one I'm going to use for addition, and this is the one I'm going to use for subtraction. So we're going to go 8 times, it's the addition one, so I'm going to go, what's the same thing as 19? Well, 10 plus 9, okay? And then we just use the distributive property. So we're going to go 8 times 10, which is 8 times 10, and then we're going to go plus 8 times 9. Right there. And then we're just going to do order of operations. So we have to do the multiplication first. 8 times 10 is 80 plus 8 times 9 is 72. And then I'm just going to go off to the side. Whenever you're doing little calculations, just go off to the side of your paper. 0 plus 2 is 2. 8 plus 7 is 15. So our answer is 152. Perfect. All right. On to method number 2. And you need both methods on your note sheets. This is the subtraction one. So we're going to rewrite this 8 times, and this time we're going to be using 20. 20 minus 1 is the same thing as 19. 20 minus 1, same thing. So we're going to use distributive property. So here we go. 8 times 20 subtracted by 8 times 1. Now, 8 times 20, my little 0 rule, 8 times 2 is 16, add a 0. So 8 times 2, 16, add a 0, it's 160, minus 8 times 1 is 8. And so it's just 160 minus 8, which would be 152. So we get the same thing. Now, the last time, I'm just going to do the straight multiplication of 19 times 8. So 8 times 9, that's 72. Write the 2, carry the 7. 8 times 1 is 8 plus 7 is 15. And so we get the same answer. So kind of cool. Just different ways to manipulate the numbers to get the answer using the distributive property. All right. Well, thank you, and I will see you next time.